Hi, I've done quite a few videos looking at freestyle, and I've yet to do anything in backstroke. And part of that reason is the only stroke that I'm capable of swimming, and swimming pretty poorly, I might add, is freestyle. But for the last little while, I've been increasingly more interested in backstroke and have been working with some really interesting swimmers, interesting athletes who specialise in backstroke. And so I thought it might be good to put out a short video explaining some backstroke data and hopefully offering some insights for you to be able to read backstroke if you are so inclined. If you're not a backstroker, if you're not a coach that works with athletes who are backstroking, if you're a triathlete, then you might not be interested in this at all. So no harm, no foul. But this is for those that are interested in backstroke. So the first thing I want to do is give a big thank you to Matteo Restivo. Matteo is an Italian Olympic backstroker. He's a former European Championship medalist in the 200 metres backstroke. And he's just been swimming in Paris at the Olympic Games. He's a 2-times Olympian, having also swum in Tokyo. And Matteo very generously agreed for me to use his data in this analysis that I'm going to step through. So let me just start with where we are here. As you can see, we're looking at a 200 metre data. It's 4 laps of a 50. It's not race pace by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a good bunch of data to have a look at. And you can see it's reasonably consistent between each hand, a little bit of variation across the 4 laps, but and likewise this stroke rate is nice and consistent too. But let's get into the force field, because this is of course where we see the direction that those forces are being applied. And one of the things I find really interesting in here is how it philosophically differs from freestyle, because freestyle is understandably where we spend most of our time looking at data, because the vast majority of data we get is free. And the first thing I want to point out, and I am going to use a couple of comparisons with free. The first thing I want to point out is in freestyle, at the end of the glide, our first move is one of down. So to go from here and to get into that propulsive position, that hand needs to come down as it's trying to catch. That's the freestyle. Backstroke, of course, is flipped 90 degrees, because as the hand enters the water, the first move isn't one of down, it's one of side, because we're trying to get that hand into that lateral position. And I need to stress that the principle here is exactly the same across all strokes. It's about how can I get my paddle facing my feet and pushing towards my feet to propel me either backwards as a backstroker or forwards as a freestyler. So the principle between the two strokes is exactly the same, and butterfly too. It's exactly the same. It's just that with backstroke, once the hand comes in, that first move is that lateral move to get that hand to come round and get into a position where it can now push all the way through. And what is important is that that hand stays vertical and also perpendicular to the side of the pool, to the direction that we're going. You want it to be coming through like this. What you don't want is you don't want it to be coming through like this, or like this, or like this, or like this. It's all about this. Hence, this chart here, this force versus time, this can tell us how that hand is performing on average through the lap. And so the next, coupled with the fact that the freestyle is down, and normally we see the two biggest directions in freestyle are propulsive and downward. It's flipped with lateral, with backstroke, and the two biggest ones tend to be propulsive and lateral, so left and right. And downward tends to be quite low. And this lap here, we're on lap 2. Let's have a look at lap 1. Yeah, still the same. Downward of 19%, which I've seen Matteo's data before. We've worked with Matteo on some stuff before, which is actually pretty high for him. Normally his downward force sits around the 10%, maybe even a little bit less. And if you can get that down to the 10% and maintain your sort of lateral stuff, then you're able to really kick your propulsive, because you tend to see that propulsive percentage tends to be a little bit higher in backstroke than it is in freestyle in terms of the optimal percentage, what we're looking for. So here we see where we sit now with the split in here. We can isolate the hands. We'll have a look at the right hand. Now look at this, right? The right hand has got downward of 7.9 and he's 77% propulsive. And when I go to his left hand's only 52% propulsive, but look at this downward force. He's got he's more than triple on his left hand, the downward force, than he is on his right hand. I'll have a quick squiz at his lap 2, and let's see if that changes. No, 50% and 30%. So Matteo is nothing if not consistent in his approach. So that's the very basic info that you can glean from this chart, and looking at splitting the hands and seeing which hand is doing what. And I think, I've done a lot of work on freestyle, and I know, I absolutely know what I think really good looks like in here for freestyle. But when it comes to backstroke, I'm very limited, so I can't say with a huge degree of confidence what these numbers should be. But I think you'd really want to be north of 75% in the propulsive direction to be looking really good in backstroke. Let's have a look at consistency, because consistency is always interesting to see what the hand path looks like. And I much prefer to look at consistency than looking at stroke path and hand velocity, because the problem I have with stroke path and hand velocity is it's only letting me look at one stroke at a time. Now, for somebody like Matteo, for an Olympic swimmer, that's actually pretty good, because he will be consistent through the swim. However, a lot of us are pretty lousy, and so trying to diagnose off one stroke can be, I think, a little bit problematic. So that's why I like to look at consistency, because consistency gives me a good feel for all of those strokes in the lap. So when I turn them both on, you can see he is very consistent within each hand, but obviously the thing that stands out here is the differential in here between his right and his left on the side-on view. You can see he's got this real dip on the left, but his right has got less. And my gut feeling is that this dip that we're seeing here would probably account for a big chunk of Matteo's downward force on his left, which is robbing his propulsion. But it's too early to call that. We need to step through another couple of charts before we can really understand what's going on. So again, I am surprised that there is this differential in here between left and right. And the reason I'm surprised, it's not unusual to see it on freestylers for the simple reason that there's breathing involved. And the very best freestylers, don't get me wrong, the very best rotate their head minimally so that they've just got the corner of their mouth sticking above the water. It's all about how do I keep my shoulders and everything and my body stable, as opposed to everything rotating around as I'm breathing. Understandably, in backstroke, we don't have this problem, so I would ordinarily expect to see a lot more parity, if you like, a lot more symmetry in a backstroke, because we're not subject to the vagaries of head turning and therefore difference in depth happening with each of the hands. So there's something interesting in here, and we might have a look at a couple of these other. Let's have a look at lap 4 and see if it changes. Exactly the same. We'll look at lap 2. Yeah, it's exactly the same. So there's a real pattern here for Matteo. There's a real pattern here. And you know, it might be something as simple as he might have had a shoulder injury. It might be something that explains it like that, I don't know. But it begs you to ask the question, what's going on here? Why is it different? We'll have a look at his force versus time just quickly and see if anything stands out dramatically. Not a lot. There's a bit of lost propulsion going on some of these strokes, as you can see. You know, here where he's getting propulsive and then it's dropping off and then coming back again. That's happening a little bit, but there's not a huge amount there. If we look at his vertical, yeah, and this is interesting too on his vertical. I mean, first of all, you can see he's got a lot more vertical force generating in his left hand as opposed to his right hand, and we saw that on his force field. And I'm a bit surprised that he's generating this downward force so much at the early part of the stroke. I mean, particularly look here, and I'll go through that in the next chart when we look at, we'll pick apart one stroke and we'll have a look at his hand path on that stroke, and we'll also look at his different force vectors to see what forces are at play where. We'll have a look at his lateral, see what we can see in his lateral. Yeah, a little bit different here between the right and the left. Look at this. Look at this right lateral force here and his left here. So you can see the pattern in his right. He's got a very consistent pattern with his right hand here, here, and here. But his left looks quite different, doesn't it? So there's something going on differently between the left and the right hand, which would reflect, and it's at the beginning part, the early part of the stroke, which reflects exactly what we saw here on the consistency, which is, again, at the early part of the stroke. There's that significant differential happening. So let's see if we can see what that is. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go and have a look at, I'm going to pick a stroke. Let's look at a right hand 12, because we've got this drop off in propulsion. And I'm going to start with his vertical, because I think the vertical view is really important, because remember I said when that hand comes through, you want that hand to be like nice and straight and square and coming in. You don't want to be coming in like this. You don't want to be coming in like that. It's important that wrist is firm and that hand, and you're getting that maximum surface area of the hand pushing back towards the feet, which makes me question what's going on here, because here, as you can see, is where we're getting peak downward force. So let's have a look at exactly where that is in the stroke. So this is where the hand is, where it enters the water. This is in line with the red line, which is the force, the force detection. And as I move the hand through, and here we're starting to pull, we're generating downward force here. But look where we are on the path. This really should not be generating downward force. So there's something going on here that's generating this downward force here, which I would suggest is that hand is moving like that. I'm exaggerating, okay? So just for the point of this, it's moving like that as opposed to moving like that, because that is very clearly generating this downward force. So let's have a look at the overhead view and see where that is. And it's right there at the extreme edge of that hand path. And that absolutely at that point, that should be generating maximum propulsion. It should be maximum propulsion, and it should not be generating downward force at that point. So I think Matteo would need to look at that and work out why he's generating that downward force there. And as we go a bit further on through the stroke, and right here, we're now going to back off, as you can see, his downward force. So it backs off to no downward force here. But we've fallen off this cliff propulsively. So what I'm going to have a look at now, I'm going to turn that off and look at his lateral and see what we can see in his lateral force. And I'll come back to the beginning. And so as we start here and the hands enter the water, and now it's going to start to pull. And I think this is a little bit interesting too, that right here is where he's starting to generate propulsion. So essentially that's his catch. But the hand has moved from here to here. And it's before it's generating any propulsion. Now, coincidentally, I had a really interesting session yesterday with an Australian coach who is a like elite level, very elite level. And he told me he'd actually worked a bit with Kaylee McEwen. Now, if you're a backstroke fan, you'll know that Kaylee McEwen has just done the double-double between Tokyo and Paris, the 100, 200 metre backstroke gold medal in both Olympic Games. It's just a phenomenal achievement and an amazing backstroker. And what was really interesting, this coach was telling me that when he was working with her, he spotted something that was highly unusual, and that is that when a hand came in the water here, as it started very quickly, she got that hand round and very quickly got it into a position where she was propulsive. And as she moved through that stroke, she was able to flex her wrist. Now, it's a bit hard to see on here, but she was able to flex her wrist to give her the maximum amount of time that that hand is pushing back. Now, this is different to a lot of people, or most people, I dare say, or if not almost all, who will come in and they won't flex the wrist. They will keep it straight and it'll just move like this. And as it moves like this, you've got to wait until you get to here before you're in a position where you're generating real propulsive force. Whereas Kaylee, as I understand it, is starting right back here. And that means this flexibility of the wrist as it comes through. And he said to me it's highly unusual and he hasn't seen it before. And his observation was, he doesn't think it's a coincidence that he is one of the greatest backstrokers in women's swimming in history, with this really interesting approach to what she's doing with a wrist and a hand. Now, I'm sorry if I've given all your secrets away, Kaylee, but I found that really fascinating, and if you're a backstroker, I hope you will too, because as like I was saying before, that hand has moved this distance before it's going to start to generate any propulsion. And as we continue to go through, it's still pushing outwards, as you can see with this lateral force. Remember, where we're positive in lateral force, the hands are facing outwards. Where we're negative, positive, the hands are facing outwards. Where we're negative, hands are facing inwards. So we're generating positive lateral force here, so that hand is understandably facing outwards. It's going to continue along here until here. It's now hit maximum outward facing lateral force. We come a little bit further and now that's decreasing as that hand has moved around to be facing the back. But, we're dropping off the cliff here. And this is where we're going to lose all our propulsion. And then, as you can see, as that hand now comes in laterally, it comes in, we're getting this inward lateral force. It's not a lot. It's just an indication that that hand is now rotating in as opposed to staying out. And obviously it's got to rotate in at some point. But the name of the game is to have it facing your feet to the maximum as much as possible for as long as possible. And then in the end, it comes down and comes out. And speaking of coming down and coming out, I'm going to go back to the vertical view and we'll go back to our side-on view. And this is where we expect to see that downward force occurring in here. As the hand comes down and then sweeps out of the water, as you expect, then we get the downward force. So this is the one that I'm a bit concerned about as to why we're generating downward force early on in the stroke. Whilst we're here, we'll have a quick squeeze. We'll see if we can find a left, right? And you can see here, this is a fair chunk of downward force here at the front end that we're getting, which, like I said, is probably to do with this depth profile. But we're looking, once the hand, got to get my hand right, sorry. Once the hand comes in, we don't want that hand to rotate and give us downward force. We want that hand to come through and stay perpendicular as much as possible. We want it to be full face of the hand as much as possible. So we don't want this to happen, and it's this that's generating this. And that's why we're getting so much downward force at the front end of the stroke. And then as we go through a bit further, and here you can see where we're just about to hit this rise and then go down to finish the stroke, to close it out, this is where he's generating this downward force, which again, you know, I think there's probably too much. And just to stress it again, we'll come back here, pop in this vertical and have a look here, and you can see very clearly this pattern. There's a lot of upfront downward force here, here, here and here. There's a lot of back end downward force on the left, as you can see there. And we're also getting this, I expect to see this back end downward force on the right hand that we see here. And as you can see on the right hand, here, here, and here, it's considerably less than here, here, and here on the left hand, which tells us there's an opportunity on the left hand here to improve this, to be able to transition or transfer some of that downward force on the left into propulsive. Likewise, this front end downward force, we should be able to minimize that a bit as well. And again, get that through that hand position and hand direction, get that more into facing directly towards the feet and have that hand coming through nice and square and not coming through like this, because obviously then we're going to be losing all that lovely surface area for propulsion. So again, if you're a backstroker, I hope I haven't bored you to tears. If you're not a backstroker, I hope you might have picked something up out of this anyway. I don't know about you, but I'm not a backstroker, but I do find this stuff intellectually really interesting. You know, talking to these elite coaches and these elite swimmers gives me a real buzz, and being able to study this sort of data and look at what sort of patterns are happening and be able to then picture in my mind's eye, and I'm sure you will too, exactly what that hand's doing at that point, and ascertain whether it's a positive or a negative for performance. Yeah, so thanks very much. Hope you've got something out of this. Hope you found it interesting. And any issues, any questions, give us a yell, support@eolab.com. I'm always available for doing one-on-one data review sessions. If you'd like me to help you, look and interpret your data, once you have a session with me, you'll find it a hell of a lot easier and a lot clearer. I'm happy to do that with you. Good luck. Thank you.